right, let's bring in political reporter Rick Albin now.
Yeah, boy, Rick, close your eyes and you'd think you'd still on the campaign trail.
Yeah, it had that real campaign feeling. We've gotten used to Trump's official speeches sounding like that, but this one was really more than ever because the president took it directly to the former administration and mentioned by name President Biden. And he blamed him and Democrats for what he says are failures, everything from open borders to a bad economy to high energy prices and many other ills he claims that he will solve. Speech had a very in-your-face feel if you were sitting on the Democratic side of the chamber, with the president sometimes calling them out directly, at one point challenging them to stand up and applaud during his speech. That admonition was not heeded, although one Democratic member from Texas, pardon me, was escorted out of the chamber for protesting. About ending DEI, the president talked a great deal, and other programs, a recurring theme during his campaign. He talked about blocking men from women's sports and establishing energy independence. He says most of what he's done in the first days as president have been aimed at getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse to save the government money, and consequently, he says, the American taxpayer will save. Talked about a list of foreign aid that he has ended, that he said was wasteful. He openly mocked some of those programs, again claiming it would save taxpayer money. He said he intends in time to balance the federal budget, though details are very thin on that. He also listed dozens of other initiatives. And the president covered a lot of ground, but on three big issues we expected to hear a lot, the president dealt with tariffs, saying that in time, those two will help the American economy, though he admitted there could be some pain in the meantime. He said he will place tariffs on any country that does the same to the United States. Stock markets reacted negatively to those tariff announcements earlier today. On the budget and the pending end of a continuing resolution, he did not have a great deal to say, but towards the end of the speech, he did talk about Ukraine. He said that he wanted that conflict to come to an end. He said the United States had put in billions of dollars and a couple of thousands of people were being killed every week. He said he wants it stopped. He says he's heard from President Zelensky and he's ready to come to the table. He says he's also heard from Russian officials who said that they may be on some type of a glide path to a peace agreement. And he said he wants to stop this war. And he also says in order to stop a war, you have to talk to both sides. Now, that was kind of towards the end of the speech, one of the major things we were looking to hear. The three things I talked about at 5 o'clock were he was going to talk about Ukraine. He was going to talk about tariffs. He was going to talk about the budget. I think on balance, he didn't talk about any one of those three issues in the detail that I would have expected. And I assume we'll hear more on those as they go along, particularly on Ukraine, which is kind of one of those pressing issues. But ultimately, it's going to be, what is he going to do to make good on the promise to make goods and services in this country more affordable, to bring interest rates down, and to make housing more affordable? Those are some of the things, along with those cultural issues that he talked about, that helped get him elected. Now, you have to figure out how to do it.
That's right. A real litmus test.
That's right.
All right. Rick Albin, thank you.